Good morning, everyone. My name is Aniket, and I'm a PhD student at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. In this talk, I'll be presenting our work on computing fair and efficient allocations with few utility values. This is joint work with my advisor, Jugal Garg. We studied the problem of fair division, which is about allocating a collection of resources or goods to a set of agents. Now, the agents may have different preferences about which goods they'd like to receive. So the question is, how do you allocate these goods to agents in a manner that is perceived as fair by the agent? Naturally, this problem has many real-world applications, and examples include dividing an inheritance without causing jealousy among the heirs, divorce settlement, course allocation, and so on. So let me introduce the model a bit more formally. We have n agents as shown on the left, m indivisible goods on the right. Now, the goods being indivisible means they cannot be divided or shared by a group of agents. The agents have different preferences over these goods, which they express using non-negative values. So here Vij denotes the value that agent I has for the good j. Since the goods are indivisible, an allocation is simply a partition of the goods into n bundles, x1 through xn. Here xi denotes the bundle that is allocated to agent I. We denote by Vi of xi the total value that agent I gets from her bundle xi. And in this work, we assume that the valuation functions are additive, which means that the value that an agent gets from a set of goods is simply the sum of the values of the goods in that set. So as I mentioned, the fair division problem asks if we can allocate goods fairly. So let me talk about the fairness notions we consider. Arguably, the most popular notion of fairness is envy-freeness, which means that no agent envies another. Formally, every agent I should prefer her own bundle xi over the bundle xk of any other agent k. In other words, Vi of xi should be at least Vi of x. And note that in comparing bundles, the agent I uses her own valuation function Vi. And one can ask if envy-free allocations always exist, and it turns out that the answer is no. So consider this example where you have two agents I and k, and three goods which are equally liked by the agent. So in any allocation, some agent will get at most one good. And so in this example, I gets only one good, and I will end up envying agent. So thus envy-free allocations needn't exist. However, notice that if one good is removed from the bundle xk, I does not envy k anymore. So this leads us to a relaxation of envy-freeness called envy-free up to one good, or EF1. We say that an allocation is EF1 if for all agents I and k, there is some good g in the bundle xk such that removing that good causes the envy of I to disappear. So it turns out that unlike envy-free allocations, EF1 allocations always exist and can be computed in polynomials. So in EF1, the removal of a particular good g from the bundle xk caused the envy of agent I to disappear. A stronger notion called envy-free up to any good, or EFX, demands that this should happen for every good g of xk. In other words, we say an allocation is EFX if for all agents I and k, no matter which good g you remove from xk, removing that causes the envy of I to disappear. So any EFX allocation is an EF1 allocation, but not vice versa. So this is a very desirable fairness notion. In some sense, it's kind of the closest that you can get to envy-freeness when working with indivisible goods. But we do not know if EFX allocations exist, and settling the existence of EFX allocations is sometimes considered fair division's biggest open problem. So while fair allocations are desirable, it's also important for them to be efficient. So consider this example where there are three agents and three goods, and an agent likes a good of their color and has no value for goods of the other color. So in this allocation, every agent gets a good that does not match their color and therefore gets value 0. But this allocation is EFX. For example, the blue agent can remove this good from the bundle of the green agent, and the envy of the blue agent towards the green agent disappears. However, compared to this allocation, the following allocation is clearly better. Here, every agent is matched to a good of their matching color, so every agent gets a utility of 1. So every agent is better off, and in fact, this is also envy-free. So essentially, we want allocations that are Pareto-optimal, which is the standard notion of economic efficiency. We say that an allocation X is Pareto-optimal if there is no allocation Y that makes some agent better off and no agent worse. In other words, there is no allocation Y that sort of dominates X. A stronger notion of economic efficiency is called fractional Pareto-optimal. So we say that an allocation is fractionally Pareto-optimal even if we allowed the goods to be divided or to be assigned fractionally, there is no fractional allocation Y that dominates. So clearly an FPO allocation is PO, but not vice versa. And these allocations are desirable not only because they're a stronger notion of economic efficiency, but also because they admit efficient verification. So given an allocation X, it's easy to check if X is fractionally Pareto-optimal, but co-NP complete to check if X is Pareto-optimal. So if a centralized agency were responsible for constructing an allocation, if the guarantee that they gave were that the allocation is FPO, each agent can individually verify whether that is the case. But whereas if the allocation were only Pareto-optimal, such a certification is not computationally easy. And finally, FPO allocations also have an interesting connection to Fisher markets, which we will shortly see. So having defined these fairness and efficiency notions, we can ask, can we obtain allocations that are simultaneously fair and efficient? And in this work, we show that we can obtain EFX plus FPO allocations for an interesting subclass where agents have only two values for the goods. So more concretely, we say that an instance is said to be K valued if the agent's values for the goods come from a set of size K. In particular, for two valued instances, all values are either A or B for two non-negative reals A and B. So these classes are very useful from a value elicitation point of view. So deciding how much an agent values a particular good is often a tricky task. So one simple thing that can be done is to ask the agents to rank the goods on a small scale, like 1 to 5 as shown, and use these rankings to obtain the values. So in this, with this interpretation, two valued instances model high and low interest. And more generally, few valued instances are well studied in literature, including in context of assigning papers to referees, maximum fair allocations, and so on. So with these definitions, let me tell you what's known about computing fair and efficient allocations. Let's start with EF1 plus PO. It's known that they exist and they can be computed in pseudo-polynomial time. The same work also showed that EF1 plus fractionally Pareto-optimal allocations exist, but this was via a non-constructive argument, which did not lead to an algorithm. So recently, these results were improved to show pseudo-polynomial time algorithm for computing such an allocation. For subclasses, it's known that for binary valuations, an EF1 plus FPO allocation can be computed in polynomial time, as well as for the class of K evaluations, where K is a constant. And note that this is a class which slightly generalizes the class of K valued instances that I described earlier. So these results sort of suggest that maybe restricting the number of utility values makes the problem tractable. So let's now look at known results for EFX. As I mentioned earlier, existence is mainly open apart from a positive result for 3 agents. For 2 valued instances, it's known that we can compute an EFX allocation in polynomial time. In general, EFX in conjunction with PO need not exist. But once again, for binary instances, binary evaluations, we can show that EFX plus FPO allocations can be computed in polynomial time. So following the intuition that fewer values make these problems tractable, we show in this work that for 2 valued instances, EFX plus FPO allocations exist and can be computed in polynomial time. So our main result shows that for fair division instances where all the values are either A or B, an EFX plus FPO allocation can be computed in strongly polynomial. Now suppose we slightly generalize this class to allow agents to have 0 values for some of the goods. Then it turns out that EFX plus PO allocations are no longer guaranteed for them. And then it's natural to ask, given an instance, how difficult is it to even know that EFX plus PO allocations exist or not? So we show that this turns out to be NP complete, even for this slightly general class. So in the interest of time, let me now focus on the first result. Our algorithm relies on Fisher markets. So let me describe what Fisher markets are. So a Fisher market is broadly similar to the fair division setup. But now every agent comes with an initial budget, and the goods can be fractionally allocated, and they are additionally assigned a price. The agents use their budgets to buy goods, and they try to maximize their value subject to their budget constraints. So a market equilibrium is a fractional allocation together with a set of prices for the goods, where all agents spend their budgets completely, all goods are completely allocated. So in this example, the blue agent comes with a $10 budget, spends $1 on the football, $5 on the pizza, and $4 on the books. The football is priced at $4, $3 of which come from the red agent and $1 comes from the blue. So the blue agent owns 1/4 of the football. More importantly, in an equilibrium, an agent spends money only on those goods that give her maximum bang for buck or maximum value for money. Intuitively, an agent has an incentive to spend an extra dollar only on those goods that give her the maximum marginal gain. So let's see how Fisher markets can help us to construct EFX plus FPO allocation. So we maintain a Fisher market equilibrium XP, where the allocation X is integral, in which goods are allocated indivisibly, and the goods are assigned prices P. And here every agent owns only MBB goods. So the first welfare theorem shows that for any Fisher market equilibrium XP, the allocation X is FPO. So that takes care of fractional Pareto optimality. So let's see what we should do for EFX. So suppose we can do something stronger. Suppose we can ensure a price envy-freeness up to any good, which is the same as the EFX condition, but with agent spending instead of values. So we require that for all agents I and K, the spending of an agent I, which is the sum of prices of goods in the bundle of agent I, should be at least the spending of any other agent's bundle after removing one. Then, because the allocation is on MBB, an agent's value for her own bundle is proportional to her spending, and her value for the bundle of somebody else is at most the spending of the other bundle. So in this sense, PEFX is a stronger condition than EFX. And the key message is that the spending works as a proxy for the value. Another use of this is that we can now compare different bundles using their total spending instead of using values, which isn't possible because different agents can have different valuation costs. So this suggests that we should look for integral market equilibria that are PEFX. But since PEFX implies PEF1, getting PEF1 is an absolute necessity. So that's how we start our algorithm. We start with an initial market equilibrium. Here, solid lines denote allocation edges and dashed lines denote MBB edges. Since we have only two values A and B, we can first scale them to 1 and K, where K is the ratio of A and B. And note that our fairness notions and our efficiency notions are all scale free, so this transformation is without loss of generality. And we can show that for this two-valued class, all prices will be either 1 or K. So here K is 5 and all prices are 1 or 5. So now observe here the green agent, who is the poorest agent, envies a rich agent, the red agent, even after removal of one good. So to alleviate this envy, we can take one good away from the rich agent. But remember that we only want allocations that are fractionally Pareto optimal. So we transfer only across MBB edges. So here the green agent is not PF1 towards the red agent. So we transfer this football from the red agent to the blue agent. So in doing so, the green agent stops envying the red agent, but now the blue agent has become too rich. So once again, we can transfer a good along an MBB edge from the blue agent to the green agent. And we end up with a PEF1 plus FPO allocation. But remember, we want PEFX allocation. And in fact, I claim that this process produces a PEFX allocation for two-valued instances. So suppose that's not the case. So suppose a poor agent L is not PEFX towards an agent H. Okay. So suppose H is reachable from L via some path containing this good J. Then L cannot envy H after removing J, because if it did, then our algorithm would continue transferring goods. So the reason that L is not PEFX towards H is because L still envies H after removing some unreachable good G. Okay. Further, G is problematic only if G is a smaller price good than J. Because we are dealing with values, instances where the values are 1 or k, we can show that the prices must also be 1 and 2. Which means that if G is cheaper than G is cheaper than J, then its price must be 1 and J's price must be k. But then look at agent I. J is on MBB for agent I, which means that I considers it in her best interest to spend money on a good of price k. Then because the values are 1 and k, I must also have an MBBH to the good G because it's cheaper. If I considers it in her best interest to spend money on an expensive good of price k, then she should also consider it in her best interest to spend money on the cheaper good of price 1, which means that this MBBH must be present. So if there is any PEF and NV that L has towards H after removing G, because this MBBH is present, our algorithm continues transferring these goods. So to summarize what we did, we looked for alternating paths from a least spender to an agent H, such that I is not PEF1 towards agent H, and we transferred goods along such paths until all reachable agents are PEF1, and we showed that this in fact shows PEFX. But what about agents that are not unreachable and violate PEF? So for example, here the green agent is the poorer agent, and there is who has PEFX envy towards the red agent, but the red agent is not reachable from the green agent via any path. So what do we do in this case? So we look at the component of agent I, which is the set of the least spender I, which is a set of agents and goods which are all reachable from the least spender through some path. And we raise the prices of all these goods by a factor of k. We show that what this does is that for agents in the component, the goods outside the component start looking more attractive since the goods they own have become costlier. And we can show that using the fact that all values are 1 and k, this creates an MBBH from some agent in the component to a good outside the component. And now because these new MBBH edges are present, you transfer goods and you continue. So the previous slide showed that reachable agents do not cause any PEFX envy. And this slide shows us what to do when unreachable agents cause PEFX. So it should be clear that if our algorithm terminates, we terminate with a PEFX plus FQ allocation. So to show termination, our proof relies on a series of lemmas, the most important of which is the observation that when an agent I stops being the least spender and becomes the least spender again, her utility strictly increases. Now, because there are only two values, A or B, the value that an agent has for a set of goods is simply A times the number of goods of value A plus B times the number of goods of value B. And each of these quantities is bounded by m plus 1, where m is the total number of goods, which means that the number of different values an agent can get is at most polynomial, which means that an agent can become a least spender again at most polynomially many times. Together with other arguments, this shows that our algorithm terminates in polynomial time with an EFX. So we have other interesting results in our paper as well. We show analogous results for the fairness notion of equitability of any good. We also work on the problem of maximizing Nash welfare, where the Nash welfare of an allocation is defined as the geometric mean of agent utility. So for two valued instances, we show that our EFX plus FPO algorithm approximates the maximum Nash welfare to a factor of 1.061. And for three values, we show NP hardness of approximation beyond a constant factor. So I will end with some directions for future work. Firstly, of course, is can we compute EF1 plus PO allocations in polynomial time? Showing some other classes which have polynomial time algorithms would also be very interesting. Secondly, can we identify classes for which EFX plus PO allocations exist? In fact, identifying when EFX exists would also be very interesting. And finally, what about problems for chores? Even the existence of EF1 plus PO allocation for chores is not. So to quickly summarize, this talk was about computing allocations that are envy-free up to any good and Pareto optimal. We presented a polynomial time algorithm for computing an EFX plus FPO allocation for the class of two-valued instances, where this algorithm used market equilibria for ensuring Pareto optimality and a relaxation of price envy-freeness to ensure EFX. Here, we crucially use the two-valued nature of the instance, both for proving correctness and the runtime analysis. Next, we show that if we generalize from two-valued instances to three-valued instances, EFX plus FPO allocations need not exist, and deciding their existence is NP hard. We also had some results on equitability and some results on maximum Nash wealth. So that brings me to the end of my talk. Thanks a lot for listening. Thanks also to the SAGT chairs and the organizers for their help. And please do check out the full paper on my webpage, and I'll be happy to answer questions if there are. Thank you.